I walk down the aisle past 3 empty seats, reserved for the people who raised me. 2 years later, I posted one photo of my $135,000 Porsche, and my phone instantly lit up. They did not call to apologize. They called to demand I sign a guarantee for their debt, but they did not know I had already signed the one document that ensured my money would never touch their hands. My name is Scarlett Rivera, and right now, the silence in this bridal suite is louder than the wind howling through the Blue Ridge Mountains outside. I stand in the center of the room at the Laurel Ridge Glass House in Asheville, staring at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. My dress is a cloud of silk and lace, fitted perfectly to my frame, a garment I paid for with the bonus from my last fiscal quarter. I look like the perfect bride. I look like a woman who has everything, but my eyes keep darting back to the white marble countertop where my phone sits face up. It is strictly silent. Not a buzz, not a flash, not a single pixel lighting up to tell me that someone on the other end remembers I exist today. There is a soft knock at the door, and then Tamsin, my wedding planner, steps inside. She is a professional, a woman who has managed crises ranging from collapsed cakes to runaway ring bearers. But today she looks unsettled. She does not need to say a word for me to know exactly what she is thinking. I see the pity swimming in her eyes, veiled behind her mask of professional efficiency. "It is time, Scarlett," she says softly, her hands clasped in front of her. I nod. Unable to trust my voice, I look at the phone one last time. Nothing. I grab my bouquet, the stems wrapped in ivory satin, and follow her out, from the top of the stairs. I look down at the ceremony space. The Laurel Ridge Glass House is stunning, a transparent cathedral surrounded by the burning red and orange hues of autumn foliage. I see over 100 guests settled in their chairs. They are a sea of anticipation, friends and colleagues who made the flight, people who care enough to be here, but my eyes do not linger on the smiling faces. They magnetize instantly to the front row on the left side. 3 chairs, 3 white wooden folding chairs with elegant, reserved signs draped over the backs. They are empty, in a room full of life. They look like a gap in a smile, a missing tooth, a hollow space that screams louder than the music starting to swell from the string quartet. The memory of the phone call from 3 days ago hits me like a physical blow to the chest, threatening to buckle my knees. I can still hear my mother's voice, dismissive and rushed, echoing in my ears. Marlene had sighed into the receiver. The sound of papers shuffling in the background, likely some investment portfolio for my brother. "We are just so busy right now. Scarlett," she had said, her tone flat, as if I were asking for a ride to the mall rather than their attendance at my wedding. "The timing is just impossible with your brother's new venture." Then came the voice of my father, Victor, booming from somewhere in the room, not even bothering to come to the phone to speak to me directly. "Tell her not to make a scene, Marlene. She is always so dramatic about these things. We will send a gift." Dramatic. That is what they called it when I asked for the bare minimum of parental affection. That word has been a leash around my neck for 35 years. I step out into the open air. The music shifts to the processional. As I begin my walk down the aisle, the whispering starts. It is a low hum, distinct from the wind rustling the leaves. I know what they are saying. I can practically read the lips of my former college roommate in the 3rd row. They are asking where my family is. They are wondering what is wrong with me, what secret defect I must harbor, that my own parents and brother would skip my wedding day. I feel the heat rise in my cheeks, a flush of shame that I have spent a lifetime trying to outrun. But I force my spine to straighten. I lift my chin until my neck aches. I will not cry. I will not give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I am Scarlett Rivera, the founder of a multi-million-dollar compliance firm, and I built this life myself. I walk past the 3 empty chairs without looking down at them. They are a judgment. Yes, but I refuse to accept the verdict. I lock eyes with Gavin Brooks at the end of the aisle. He looks devastatingly handsome in his charcoal suit, but it is the fierce, blazing protectiveness in his gaze that nearly undoes me. When I finally reach him, my hands are trembling so hard the bouquet shakes. He takes my hands in his warm, steady grip, grounding me instantly. He leans in close, ignoring the officiant for a second, creating a private world just for us. "Look at me," he whispers, his voice rough with emotion but steady as a rock. "We are enough. You and me, we are the family now." The ceremony is a blur of light and vows, beautiful in a way that aches deep in my bones. It is painful because it is perfect, and its perfection proves a terrible truth. I did this alone. I paid for the flowers. I organized the catering. I secured the venue. Every detail is a result of my hard work, my taste, my money. The empty seats are not just an absence. They are a proof of concept. I can stand on my own. I can be brilliant without them. Later, under the twinkling fairy lights of the reception, the champagne flows and the laughter is loud. My best friend, Kira Vaughn, stands up with a microphone in her hand. She looks fierce and loving, her dark dress contrasting with the bright lights. She raises her glass high, her eyes locking onto mine. "To the family we choose," she says, her voice ringing clear over the clinking silverware. "Because sometimes, blood is just biology, but loyalty is a choice, to Scarlett and Gavin, the strongest team I know." The words hit me harder than the alcohol. Family we choose. I look around the room at the faces of my friends, my employees, my mentors. They are here. They showed up. The night winds down, and the band plays their final song. Hours later, I find myself back in the quiet of the hotel room, kicking off my heels and sinking onto the edge of the bed. I pick up my phone one last time. It is past midnight. There are 0 missed calls, 0 text messages, not even a generic congratulations image forwarded from a chain email. For the first time in my life, the crushing weight of their indifference shifts. It usually feels like a stone on my chest, suffocating and heavy, but tonight, it transforms into something lighter. Clarity. I stare at the blank screen. They are not missing because of a traffic jam. They are not missing because of a medical emergency. They are missing because they chose to be elsewhere. They chose their comfort over my milestone, and that means I am free. I place the phone face down on the nightstand. I do not cry. I simply realize that their absence is their choice, and my happiness is finally, truly, mine. I was 8 years old when I realized that in the economy of my parents' attention, I was facing a permanent recession. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen, clutching a certificate with a gold foil seal. It was first place in the district art competition. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the electric buzz of pride. I had spent weeks on that charcoal sketch, blending shadows until my fingertips were permanently stained black. I wanted them to see it. I needed them to see it. Marlene was at the kitchen island, but she was not looking at me. She was furiously folding a stack of freshly laundered debate team uniforms. My brother, Camden Hargrove, was sitting at the table, eating a sandwich with the casual entitlement of a prince who knows the servants will clean up the crumbs. "Mom," I said, stepping forward. "I won." Marlene glanced up, her eyes sliding over me like I was a piece of furniture she had forgotten to dust. She did not stop folding. "That is nice. Scarlett, have you seen your brother's tie, the red one? He needs it for the state finals tomorrow." I lowered the paper. The gold seal caught the light, but it suddenly looked like fool's gold. "It is first place," I whispered. "Camden is under a lot of pressure right now," she replied, her voice tight. "We need to focus on him." That was the first brick in the wall. Over the years, the wall became a fortress. Victor, my father, had a philosophy that he liked to repeat at dinner parties to explain why his daughter worked at a coffee shop while his son drove a brand new sedan. "Camden needs investment," he would say, swirling his scotch. "He is sensitive. He needs a runway to take off. But Scarlett is independent. She is a survivor." He said it like a compliment. It was not. It was an abdication of duty. It was a convenient excuse to channel every family resource, financial, emotional, and logistical, into my brother, while leaving me to navigate the world without a map. I learned the lesson quickly. To survive in the Rivera-Hargrove household, one had to be invisible and low maintenance. I stopped showing them my report cards, even though they were straight A's. I stopped inviting them to my school plays. I filled out my own financial aid forms for college at the kitchen table while they planned Camden's gap year in Europe. When I needed braces, I was told it was cosmetic. When Camden needed a new laptop because he spilled soda on his, they bought him the most expensive model available the very next day. I absorbed the pain and turned it into fuel. I worked double shifts. I studied until my eyes burned. I told myself that my independence was a badge of honor, not a scar. But there was one crack in the darkness. Her name was Ms. Delaney Frost. She was an art teacher at the community center, where I took free classes on Tuesday nights. She was 50 years old, with paint under her fingernails and eyes that saw everything. One rainy Tuesday, she found me crying behind a canvas. I was 16, and Victor had just told me they could not attend my junior exhibition because Camden had a tennis match. Ms. Frost did not hug me. She did not offer empty platitudes. She simply handed me a brush. "You have fire in you, Scarlett," she told me, her voice stern but kind. "Do not let them douse it just because they are afraid of the heat. You paint for yourself. You burn for yourself." She was the first person to look at me and see a person, not a nuisance. She taught me that my value was not dependent on my parents' approval. Yet, a part of me, the wounded 8-year-old girl, still clung to a dangerous lie. I believed that if I just became successful enough, rich enough, impressive enough, they would finally turn around. I thought I could buy their love with accolades. I was wrong. By the time I was 25. The disparity was comical. Camden had failed out of 2 colleges, yet he drove a car worth $40,000 that Victor paid for. He had internships at firms owned by Victor's golf buddies, positions created solely to keep him on a payroll. Meanwhile, I was building a career in compliance software from the ground up, eating instant noodles and counting pennies to pay rent. When I bought my first decent car, a used Honda, I drove it to their house, beaming. Victor kicked the tires and asked how much the insurance cost. When Camden got a promotion he did not deserve, they threw a dinner party at the country club. The silence was their weapon of choice for me. They did not beat me. They did not starve me. They just ghosted me while we lived in the same house. Then I met Gavin. Gavin Brooks was different. He did not care about my resume. He did not care that I was the independent one. On our second date, I spilled red wine all over his white shirt. I froze, waiting for the annoyance, waiting for the sign that I was a burden. He just laughed. He dipped his napkin in water and started scrubbing, smiling at me the whole time. "It is just a shirt. Scarlett," he said. "I am more worried about you. You look like you stopped breathing." He loved me not for what I achieved, but for who I was. He loved the Scarlett who sang off-key in the shower, the Scarlett who was terrified of thunderstorms, the Scarlett who was messy and imperfect. When we got engaged, I made one last, desperate attempt to include my parents. I knew money was their language, so I tried to speak it. I went to their house a month before the wedding. I sat in the living room where I had been ignored for 2 decades. "I know travel is expensive," I said, sliding an envelope across the coffee table. "I have booked first-class tickets for you and Camden. I have reserved the presidential suite at the hotel. You do not have to pay a dime. I just want you there." Marlene did not even open the envelope. She pushed it back with a manicured finger. "It is not about the money, Scarlett," she said, her voice sounding bored. "We just have a lot going on. Camden is going through a rough patch with his business. We cannot just leave him." "He is invited too," I said, my voice cracking. "The ticket is right there." "He does not feel up to a crowd," Victor grunted, not looking up from his tablet. "And we need to support him. You are strong. You understand." It was a refusal as casual as turning down a lunch invitation. They were rejecting a fully paid luxury trip to their only daughter's wedding because my brother might feel sad. That was the moment I finally sought help. I walked into the office of Dr. Lila Soren the next week. I spent the first session crying, listing all the ways I had tried to be good, to be worthy, to be investment grade for them. Dr. Soren listened, her face unreadable. When I finished, she leaned forward and said the sentence that shattered my entire worldview. "Scarlett, you are trying to earn a currency that they do not print," she said. "You do not have to beg for love. Love is something that must be freely given. If you have to pay for it, work for it, or bleed for it, it is not love, it is a transaction. And in this transaction, you are being robbed." I left her office feeling lighter, but also colder. I realized that my independence was not a gift they gave me. It was a survival mechanism I forged in the vacuum of their neglect. And as I prepared to walk down the aisle toward Gavin, I knew that the 3 empty chairs were not a tragedy. They were the final receipt for a debt I was no longer willing to pay. The air in the conference room on the 42nd floor was so thin it felt brittle. Snapping with static electricity and the smell of stale coffee, we had been in due diligence for 6 months, a grueling autopsy of every line of code and every client contract I had built since leaving my parents' shadow. But now, the screen at the head of the table displayed the only metric that mattered. The acquisition of Sable North Compliance was official. The wire transfer had cleared. $24.8 million. I stared at the number, blinking slowly. It was not just a figure, it was validation. It was the mathematical proof that the girl who was told she needed to be independent had done exactly that, and she had done it better than the investment-grade son ever could. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my veins. "We just exited." The room erupted. My team, my real family, jumped from their ergonomic chairs. There were high fives, shouts of disbelief, and the distinct pop of a champagne cork hitting the acoustic ceiling tiles. These were the people who had slept under desks with me during product launches. These were the people who knew my coffee order and my stress tics, not because they were obligated by blood, but because we were in the trenches together. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Avery Knox, my first angel investor. He was a man of few words, a titan in the tech world who had written me a check when Sable North was nothing more than a pitch deck and a prayer. "You look like you are waiting for someone to tell you it is a mistake." "Scarlett," Avery said, swirling his glass. "I am just used to being the runner-up," I admitted. The ghost of my childhood flickering for a second. Avery leaned in, his expression turning serious. "Listen to me. Do not let the blind make you prove the light. You built this. The market does not lie. Numbers do not have favorites. You won." I clinked my glass against his. "I won," I repeated, tasting the words. Later that night, the adrenaline crash hit me. I was back in my penthouse, the city lights of Seattle sprawling out below me like a circuit board. The silence was heavy, but for once, it was not lonely, it was peaceful. I poured myself a glass of water and, out of a habit I still had not managed to break, I opened social media. I should have known better. The algorithm, cruel in its efficiency, served me a photo immediately. It was from earlier that evening. The caption read, "Supporting our community leaders at the Harlan Gala. So proud of the family." The photo showed my parents, Marlene and Victor, flanking Camden. They were dressed in black tie attire. Marlene was wearing a gown I knew cost at least $4,000. Victor looked distinguished in his tuxedo. And Camden, my brother, the entrepreneur, was beaming in the center, looking every inch the golden child. They looked like the perfect American family. They looked like people who had never missed a wedding, never ignored a daughter, never made a child feel like a ghost in her own home. I zoomed in on the image. Camden was wearing a watch I recognized. It was a vintage chronograph, easily worth $12,000. I set my phone down on the marble island and pulled out a notepad. My brain, still wired from the acquisition deal, shifted into forensic accounting mode. I knew Camden's business. He ran a boutique consulting firm that had no website, no LinkedIn presence, and, as far as I could tell, no clients. I did the math in my head. His rent in the fashionable district, $4,000 a month. His car lease on the luxury SUV, $1,200 a month. His club memberships, his clothes, his travel at least another $5,000. Camden needed to net over $10,000 a month just to break even, but I knew for a fact he had not landed a contract in 6 months because I still had alerts set up for his company name. The realization washed over me, cold and clinical. He was not successful. He was subsidized. Marlene and Victor were not just supporting him emotionally. They were bankrolling a lifestyle he had not earned, propping up a facade of success so they could maintain their social standing. They had time for galas. They had money for tuxedos. They had energy to smile for cameras. They just did not have any of those things for me. For a moment, the old hurt tried to surface. I felt the sting of tears, the urge to throw the phone across the room, but then I looked at the notepad again. I looked at the number I had written earlier in the day. 24.8 million. I did not need their money. I did not need their subsidy. And I was done needing their approval. I picked up my phone again, but this time I did not look at Instagram. I opened my calendar. I navigated to the contact information for the Porsche dealership in Bellevue. I had been looking at the listings for months, treating it like a fantasy, something responsible people did not do. I typed a note for my assistant to see first thing in the morning schedule appointment. Porsche 911, Turbo S, cash purchase. I was not buying the car to show off to them. They would probably never see it. I was not buying it to fill a hole in my heart. I was buying it because I could. I was buying it to make a physical statement to the universe and to myself. I am not the girl who needs to save every penny because she is afraid of being kicked out. I am not the girl who waits for permission. I am Scarlett Rivera, and I have resources. As I closed the app, I made a vow to myself in the quiet of my kitchen. The dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the daughter seeking affection. I was a separate entity, a sovereign state. If they ever reached out, and my gut told me that eventually, the math of Camden's lifestyle would force their hand, I would not respond with emotion. I would not ask, "Why didn't you love me?" or "Why wasn't I enough?" I would respond with structure. I would treat them exactly like a high-risk client trying to negotiate a contract without leverage. I turned off the lights and walked to my bedroom. For the first time in years, the image of their smiling faces on the screen did not make me feel small. It made me feel prepared. They were playing a game of appearances. I was playing a game of solvency. And I knew which one lasted longer. The dealership smelled of espresso and premium leather, a scent that I had always associated with people like my father, people who walked into rooms assuming they owned the furniture. But today, I was the one sitting in the chair, the finance manager. A man named David with a tie that cost more than my first car slid the final contract across the glass desk. The paper was heavy, cream-colored, and dense with legalese. I did not skim it. I read every line, my finger tracing the clauses just as I did with my clients' compliance audits. The total at the bottom was $135,000. I picked up the pen. It was heavy, a Mont Blanc that felt cool against my skin. For a second, my hand hovered over the signature line. I thought about the years I spent driving a sedan with a heater that only worked on the highest setting. I thought about the times I walked in the rain because I could not afford a cab. I thought about Victor telling me that luxury was something you earned, not something you were given. I pressed the nib to the paper and signed Scarlett Rivera with a flourish that felt less like a signature and more like a declaration of independence. "Congratulations," David said, standing up to shake my hand. "The agate gray metallic is a stunning choice. Do you want to take the keys now?" "Yes," I said. "I believe I do." Driving the Porsche 911 Turbo S off the lot was a visceral experience. The engine purred with a low, throaty growl that vibrated through the steering wheel and into my palms. It was responsive, immediate, and terrifyingly powerful. Every time I accelerated, I felt the G-force press me back into the sculpted seat, holding me, supporting me. It was not just a machine, it was a suit of armor. I drove straight home to the house I shared with Gavin. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the driveway. I parked the car in front of the garage door, the metal gleaming like liquid mercury in the twilight. I took out my phone. I did not stage a photo shoot. I did not pose on the hood. I snapped exactly one picture. It was a simple shot of the car, angular and aggressive, with our home in the background. I opened Instagram. My thumb hovered over the caption field. I typed one word. Finally, I posted it, locked the phone, and went inside to make dinner. For the next 72 hours, the silence from the Greenville, South Carolina area code was deafening. My notification feed was a steady stream of congratulations from colleagues, friends, and former classmates. People I had not spoken to in years were suddenly liking the photo. It was the algorithm of success. Money attracts attention like blood in the water attracts sharks. But my parents? Nothing, not a like, not a comment, not a text. It was classic Rivera behavior. To acknowledge my success would be to admit they had underestimated me. Ignoring it was their way of maintaining the upper hand, or so I thought. Wednesday afternoon arrived with a gray, persistent drizzle. I was in my home office, reviewing a merger agreement for a client. When my phone buzzed on the desk, the screen lit up. Cutting through the dim light of the room, Marlene, the name sat there, heavy and demanding. I stared at it for 3 full rings. My heart rate spiked, a reflex conditioned by 3 decades of walking on eggshells. But then I looked out the window at the sleek gray shape in the driveway. I remembered the weight of the pen. I remembered the wire transfer. I picked up the phone and swiped green. "Hello?" I said. My voice was level, devoid of the desperate warmth I used to inject into my greetings. There was no, "Hello, Scarlett." There was no, "How are you?" There was not even a pause for breath. "Family meeting tomorrow," Marlene said. Her voice was clipped, efficient. "It is a serious matter. We need everyone there." I leaned back in my chair, spinning a pen between my fingers. "I am working tomorrow. Marlene." "Cancel it," she snapped. "This is a family emergency." In the background, I heard a familiar, gruff voice. It was Victor. He was not speaking to me. He was speaking to her, but he was loud enough for the microphone to catch every syllable. "Tell her to be on time," Victor barked. "I do not want to wait around all afternoon." The old Scarlett would have apologized. The old Scarlett would have scrambled to rearrange her schedule, desperate to be included in the family emergency, eager to prove she was a good daughter who showed up when called. But the woman sitting in this chair had just sold a company for nearly $25 million. The woman in this chair drove a car worth more than their annual country club dues. "I am not canceling my meetings," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming the voice I used in boardrooms. "I have a slot open at 2 o'clock. If that works for you, I will come. If not, we can discuss this another time." There was a stunned silence on the other end. The static hissed. 2 o'clock, Marlene repeated, her tone faltering slightly. She was not used to resistance. She was used to compliance. "Fine, 2 o'clock. Do not be late." "And Marlene," I added, before she could hang up, "this time, I will ask the questions before I do any listening." I ended the call before she could respond. My hand was shaking slightly, but not from fear. It was the adrenaline of breaking a pattern. A moment later, a text came through from Gavin. He was downstairs, but he knew me better than anyone. He must have heard the tone of my voice through the floorboards. "If you need to pull the ripcord, I am there. Just say the word, and we leave." I smiled. It was the first time I felt safe going into the lion's den. I was not walking in alone. Even if he was not physically in the room, his belief in me was a shield. I spent the rest of the evening preparing. I did not bake a pie. I did not look for old photo albums to reminisce. I called Dr. Lila Soren. "Remember the goal, Scarlett." "Doctor," Lila said, her voice calm over the speakerphone. "You are not going there to be loved. That well is dry. You are going there to observe. You are a scientist collecting data. You are not a daughter seeking approval. Observe, I repeated. Not engage. Correct, she said. Watch their hands. Watch their eyes. Listen to what they ask for, not what they say. The truth is always in the ask. I hung up and went to my filing cabinet. I pulled out a sleek black leather document folder. I placed a notepad inside, a pen, and a single printed copy of my own financial independence statement, a personal balance sheet I had drawn up just for my own peace of mind. I was not going to bring a checkbook. I knew, with a sickening certainty, that whatever this emergency was, it would eventually resemble a dollar sign. I was preparing for a deposition, not a reunion. I stood in front of the mirror in the hallway, adjusting my blazer. I looked at the woman reflecting back at me. She looked tired. Yes, but she looked sharp. The family emergency line was a hook, and for the first time in my life, I was not biting because I was hungry. I was biting because I wanted to see who was holding the rod. I packed the document bag and set it by the door next to my keys. Tomorrow, I would drive the Porsche to Greenville, South Carolina. I would park it in their driveway, a metal monolith of my achievement. And I would walk into that house not as the child they ignored, but as the woman they could no longer afford to overlook. The silence of the last 72 hours was over. The negotiation was about to begin. The gravel of the driveway crunched under the wide tires of my Porsche 911 Turbo S as I pulled up to the house in Greenville, South Carolina. It was a sound I had not heard in years, a distinct, rhythmic grinding that used to signal my father's arrival home from work. Back then, that sound meant we had to scramble to look busy, to look productive, to look worthy of the roof over our heads. Today, the sound was different. It was heavier. It was the sound of a $135,000 machine announcing that the power dynamic had shifted. I cut the engine. The silence that followed was immediate and thick. I took a breath, checking my reflection in the rear-view mirror. My lipstick was sharp. My eyes were clear. I was not the 20-year-old girl who used to cry in her bedroom because she was not invited to family dinners. I was the CEO of Sable North Compliance. I was here to audit, not to plead. The front door opened before I even unbuckled my seatbelt. Marlene and Victor stepped out onto the porch. They looked older than I remembered, but their posture was the same rigid, expectant, like royalty waiting for a tribute. They walked down the steps, their eyes locked not on me, but on the car. Victor stopped 3 feet away from the driver's side door. He did not wave. He did not smile. He just stared at the agate gray metallic paint, his eyes tracing the curve of the fender with a hunger that made my stomach turn. I opened the door and stepped out. My heels clicked on the pavement. "Nice car," Victor said. Those were the first words he had spoken to me in 2 years. Not hello, not how are you, not we missed you, just an appraisal of my asset. "It gets me from point A to point B," I said, my voice flat. Marlene was standing behind him, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked at the car, then at my suit, calculating the cost of the fabric. "You are late," she said, though the dashboard clock read exactly 2 o'clock. "I am on time," I corrected her. "Shall we go inside?" I did not wait for an invitation. I walked past them, up the steps I had swept 1,000 times as a child, and into the house. It smelled the same lemon polish and old dust, but the air felt smaller, as if the walls had shrunk inward. In the dining room, the stage was set. My brother, Camden, was sitting at the head of the table, the spot usually reserved for Victor. His wife, Jolene, sat next to him, her hands clutching a designer handbag that I knew was a knockoff. Camden looked terrible. His face was puffy, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. In the center of the mahogany table, sitting like a monolith, was a thick stack of documents. I remained standing. "Sit down, Scarlett," Victor said. Entering the room behind me, he gestured to the chair opposite Camden, the chair where the defendant usually sits. "I will stand," I said. "I have a dinner reservation back in the city at 7, so let us get to the point." Camden flinched. The idea that I had a life, a schedule, and priorities that did not involve him seemed to confuse him. Victor walked to the table and placed his hand on the stack of papers. He tapped them twice, a rhythmic thud-thud that echoed in the quiet room. "We have a situation," Victor said, skipping the pleasantries entirely. "Camden's business is facing a temporary liquidity issue. The market has been volatile. Investors are getting cold feet." "Investors," I repeated. "Or creditors." Camden shot up in his chair. "It is a cash flow problem. Scarlett, you know how it is. You run a business. Clients pay late, vendors demand early. It is a squeeze. That is all." He was using all the right buzzwords, but his voice lacked the conviction of truth. He sounded like he was reciting a script he had barely memorized. "So, what is the ask?" I said, looking directly at the papers. Victor slid the stack across the polished wood. It stopped inches from my waist. "We need a guarantor," Victor said. "Just for a bridge loan, to get Camden through the quarter. The bank requires a signature from someone with substantial liquid assets." "And since you just bought that car," Marlene chimed in, her voice taking on a wheedling, sugary tone that set my teeth on edge. "We know you are doing well. It is just a signature. Scarlett, it is just paper. You would be helping the family through a rough patch. We will settle it all later." Later, the magical time frame where the Riveras paid their debts, a time frame that never arrived. "How much is the loan for?" I asked. "It is structured," Camden said quickly, avoiding the number. "It is a revolving line of credit. It is complex. Give me the number." "Camden," I said. He looked at Victor. Victor nodded. $400,000, Camden mumbled. I did not blink. I had just sold my company for nearly $25 million. $400,000 was not a life-ending sum for me anymore, but that was not the point. The point was the audacity. "You want me to guarantee a nearly $500,000 loan," I said slowly. "For a business I have never seen financials for a brother who has not spoken to me since I got married." "Do not be petty," Jolene snapped, speaking for the first time. "Family helps family." The room went silent. I looked at Jolene, then at Camden, then at my parents. They were all looking at me with the same expectation. They expected me to fold. They expected me to be so desperate for their acknowledgement that I would pay $500,000 just to be allowed to sit at this table. I took a step forward. I placed my hands on the back of the empty chair, gripping the wood. "Where were you?" I asked. The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. "What?" Marlene asked, blinking. "My wedding," I said. "Where were you?" "It was 2 years ago. I walked down the aisle alone. There were 3 empty chairs in the front row. Where were you?" Camden looked away. Jolene inspected her fingernails. "Oh, for heaven's sake." Marlene sighed, waving her hand as if swatting away a fly. "We told you. We were busy. Camden had a crisis. We could not just leave him. You know how sensitive he is." "A crisis," I said. "So you missed the most important day of my life because Camden had a bad day." "Stop living in the past," Victor growled, his face reddening. "We are talking about the present. We are talking about survival. Your brother needs help. Are you going to hold a grudge forever? Or are you going to step up and be a part of this family?" There it was, the trap. If I signed, I was family. If I refused, I was the villain holding a grudge. I looked at the thick file on the table. It was not a request for help. It was a demand for tribute. They did not want me. They wanted my credit score. They wanted my liquidity. They wanted the security that my name now carried, a name I built while they were busy investing in Camden. I picked up the file. It was heavy. "I am not signing this today," I said. "What?" Victor took a step toward me, his hands balling into fists. "We do not have time for games. Scarlett, the bank needs this by Friday." "Then you should have called me on Monday," I said calmly. "I will take this with me. I will have my legal team review the terms. I will need to see Camden's profit and loss statements for the last 3 years. I need to see his client list. I need to see his tax returns. That is private business information, Camden shouted, slamming his hand on the table. It becomes my business when you ask me to insure it, I countered, my voice rising just enough to cut through his noise. You want my signature? Then you get my due diligence. I do not sign blank checks, not for strangers, and right now, looking at this room, that is exactly what you all are. You ungrateful little, Victor started, but he stopped when I held up a hand. I am listening, I said. I am here, I am willing to review the proposal, but I will not sign anything until I understand exactly where this money is going. Because looking at your watch, Camden, and looking at that car in the driveway, I have a feeling the market volatility is sitting right here in this room. I tucked the file under my arm. I did not wait for a dismissal. I turned around and walked toward the door. Behind me, the silence of the room shattered into the sound of shouting, but I did not stop. I had what I came for. I had the paperwork, and for the first time, I held the leverage. I did not leave the house. Not yet. I stood there, the weight of the file in my hands feeling less like paper and more like a loaded weapon. My instincts, honed by years of navigating high-stakes compliance audits and hostile boardrooms, were screaming at me. There was something wrong with the timeline. I walked back to the table, ignoring the confused looks from my parents. I placed the file down on the mahogany surface and flipped past the glossy cover page, past the executive summary full of buzzwords about synergy and growth potential. I went straight to the back, to the exhibits, to the section labeled Personal Guarantee. My finger traced the line of text at the bottom of page 42. Camden, I said, my voice dangerously low. Why is this dated October 14th? The room went deadly quiet. Today was November 12th. It is a draft, Camden stammered, his eyes darting to the window. Like I said, we were just preparing the paperwork, standard procedure. Banks always backdate things for the quarter. Banks do not backdate personal guarantees by a full month before the guarantor has even been approached, I corrected him. I looked closer at the document. It was not just a typed name. There, on the signature line, was a scrawl of blue ink. It read, Scarlett Rivera. It looked like my signature. It had the same sharp slant to the right, the same looped S, but the T at the end was crossed too high. I never crossed my T's that high. I looked up. Camden was sweating now, a sheen of moisture gathering on his upper lip, but it was Jolene who gave it away. She had gone completely pale, her hand covering her mouth as if she were trying to physically hold back the truth. This is not a draft, I said, my voice echoing off the walls. This is an executed document. I reached into my own bag, the bag I had prepared with Dr. Lila's advice in mind, and pulled out a single, folded sheet of paper. It was a credit monitoring alert I had received 3 weeks ago. At the time, I thought it was a glitch, a soft inquiry from a credit card company I used to bank with. Now, the pieces slammed together. I have a credit inquiry here from First Merchants Bank, dated October 15th, I said, placing my document next to theirs. They pulled my full report, not a soft pull, a hard pull, the kind that requires written authorization. Victor slammed his hand on the table, rattling the fine china in the cabinet. For God's sake, Scarlett, are you accusing your own family of forgery? We are talking about saving your brother's livelihood, and you are nitpicking over administrative details. Administrative details, I laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. Victor, this is fraud. This is a felony. Someone signed my name to authorize a credit check, and looking at this loan application, someone intended to submit this signature to secure $500,000 of debt against my assets. We were going to tell you, Marlene cried out, tears instantly springing to her eyes. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times, but this time, the audience was not buying a ticket. We just needed to get the process started. The bank had a deadline. We knew you would help. We were trying to save Camden. By sacrificing me, I finished for her. You were not trying to save him. You were trying to use me as collateral damage. Again, I looked at Camden. He was no longer playing the part of the struggling entrepreneur. He looked cornered. "It is just a signature. Scarlett," he spat, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and entitlement. "I would have paid it back. I just needed the bridge. Why do you have to make everything so difficult? You have the money. You would not even miss it." "That is not the point," I said. "You stole my identity." "I did not steal it," he shouted. "I borrowed it. I am your brother." "I have one more question," I said, ignoring his outburst. I reached into my bag again. This was the piece of evidence I had debated bringing. It was the nuclear option. "I want to know who gave my social security number to the bank officer, because I have not memorized yours. Camden, you certainly do not have mine memorized." Silence. I pulled out a screenshot of an email chain. The world of high finance is smaller than people think. My CFO at Sable North used to work at First Merchants. When I saw the credit inquiry 3 weeks ago, I had asked him to make a quiet phone call. He had sent me this. "This is an email from you, Camden, to the loan underwriter," I read aloud. Subject line: guarantor details. The body of the email reads, "My sister, Scarlett Rivera, has agreed to the terms. She is traveling for business but has authorized me to submit her information to expedite the approval. She will sign the wet ink copies when she returns." I dropped the paper onto the table. It fluttered down, landing on top of the forged guarantee. "You lied to the bank," I said. "You told them I had already agreed. You used my name, my reputation, and my credit history to build a safety net for yourself, counting on the fact that when I found out, I would be too guilty or too ashamed to expose you." Victor's face was a mask of fury, but for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. He knew what this meant. This was not just a family squabble anymore. This was actionable. "You are not going to report this," Victor said, his voice dropping to a growl. "You are not going to ruin your brother over a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding is forgetting to return a call," I said, leaning in close. "Forging a signature on a commercial loan application is a federal crime. And let us be clear, Victor, I am not the one who ruined him. He ruined himself when he decided my name was his property." Marlene reached out, trying to grab my hand, but I pulled away. "Scarlett, please, he has a baby on the way. Jolene is pregnant. You cannot send him to jail. Think of the family." I looked at Jolene. She was staring at her lap, weeping silently. "If you wanted me to think of the family," I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage, "you should have thought of me as a person, not a resource. You should have invited me to the wedding. You should have called me on my birthday. You should have treated me like a daughter, not a bank vault you could crack open whenever Camden failed." I picked up the forged document. I folded it and placed it in my bag. "I am keeping this," I said, "and I am going to launch a formal investigation into the validity of every document that has my name on it in this house. If I find one more piece of paper with a signature that looks like mine, I will not call you. I will call the district attorney." Camden stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "You are so selfish," he screamed, his face red and twisted. "You always make everything about you look at me. Look at my success. Look at my car. You just came here to humiliate us." I stared at him. In that moment, the last thread of emotional attachment I had to him snapped. He did not see a sister. He did not see a human being. He saw a tool that had malfunctioned. He was angry not because he had hurt me, but because the ATM had stopped dispensing cash. "I did not come here to humiliate you, Camden," I said, zipping up my bag. "I came here to see if there was anything left of this family worth saving. Thank you for giving me the answer." I turned my back on them. The air in the room felt toxic, thick with their entitlement and their panic. I walked toward the hallway, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor, the sound of a gavel coming down. Over and over again, they were shouting my name now, a chorus of demands and pleas. But I did not stop. I had the evidence. I had the truth. And for the first time in 35 years, I was walking away with my eyes wide open. The room was vibrating with the aftershocks of my accusation. But Victor Rivera was a man who had spent 40 years believing that reality was something he could bend to his will. He ignored the evidence of fraud I had just laid out. He ignored the trembling hands of his wife and the pale, sweaty desperation of his son. He simply reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a silver pen. He held it out to me, the nib hovering in the air between us like a weapon. "Sign the guarantee." "Scarlett," he commanded, his voice dropping to that low, rumbling register that used to make me freeze as a child. "We will deal with the administrative errors later. Right now, we secure the family's future. Sign the paper." It was a test of obedience. He was banking on the muscle memory of my submission. He thought that if he commanded with enough authority, the daughter who used to desperate for his approval would resurface and obey. I looked at the pen, then I looked at him. I did not take it. Instead, I reached back into my leather document bag. The zipper made a sharp, distinct sound in the quiet room. Victor's eyes lit up. Marlene let out a small, hopeful breath. Camden leaned forward, his elbows digging into the tablecloth. They thought I was reaching for my checkbook. They thought I was reaching for a pen of my own. They thought I was folding. I pulled out a document, bound in a heavy navy blue cover with gold lettering. I placed it gently on the table, directly on top of the fraudulent loan application. "I am not here to pay Camden's debts," I said, my voice calm and clear. "I am here to show you where my money actually went." Victor squinted at the title embossed on the cover, "The Frost Fellowship Endowment." He read aloud, the words tasting strange in his mouth. "Open it," I said. "Page 3. Marlene reached out with a shaking hand and flipped the cover. Her eyes scanned the text, skimming over the mission statement and the legal jargon, hunting for the only thing that mattered to her, the numbers. She gasped. It was a wet, choking sound. Her hand flew to her throat. $15 million, she whispered. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a statue. "Scarlett, this says $15 million. Camden snatched the document from her. He stared at the figure, his eyes bulging. "You gave away $15 million, he screamed. The sound tore through the room, raw and ugly. "Are you insane? You gave $15 million to who? Who is Delaney Frost?" "She was an art teacher," I said, leaning back in my chair. "She taught at the community center. She was the woman who told me I had talent when you told me I was a distraction. She was the woman who bought me paintbrushes when you were buying Camden tennis rackets. She saw me when I was invisible to the people in this room." "She is a stranger," Camden yelled, slamming the document down. "You gave our money to a stranger." "It was never your money, Camden," I corrected him, my voice turning icy. "And she was not a stranger. She was the only family I had on Tuesday nights for 6 years. $15 million, Victor muttered, sinking into his chair as if his legs had given out. He looked older suddenly, the fight draining out of him. He was doing the math in his head. He was realizing that the safety net he thought existed, the vast reservoir of my wealth that he assumed he could tap into, was gone. "I established this endowment yesterday," I continued, enjoying the absolute silence that followed my words. "It is fully funded. The wire transfer cleared this morning. The money is dedicated to providing full scholarships for vocational and technology training for young women from low-income backgrounds, women who are overlooked, women who are told they need to be independent because no one is coming to save them." "You can cancel it," Marlene said, her voice trembling with a desperate hope. "You can undo it. Tell them it was a mistake. We need that money. Scarlett, your brother needs it." I shook my head slowly. "That is the best part. Marlene, I anticipated this conversation. I knew that if I left the money in my personal accounts, you would never stop coming for it. You would guilt me, harass me, and eventually, you might even wear me down. So I removed the option." I pointed to the paragraph at the bottom of the page. "It is an irrevocable trust," I explained, using the same tone I used to explain compliance failures to negligent CEOs. "The assets have been transferred. The trust is managed by an independent board of directors. I do not have the power to withdraw a single cent. Even if I wanted to write Camden a check today, I could not. The money belongs to the girls now. Camden looked like he was going to be sick. He stared at the document as if it were a death warrant. The realization was hitting him in waves. The safety net was not just pulled away, I had set it on fire. "You did this on purpose," Camden hissed. "You did this just to spite us." "I did it to ensure that my legacy goes to people who will actually work for it," I said. I was not finished. I reached into my bag one last time. "Since we are discussing boundaries," I said, pulling out a single, stiff sheet of letterhead paper. "This is for you." I slid it across the table to Victor. He looked at it wearily. It was not a brochure this time. It was a legal notice from the law firm representing Sable North. "What is this?" Victor asked, his voice hoarse. "It is a formal notice regarding communication protocols," I said. "Effective immediately. Any request for financial assistance, loans, or guarantees must be submitted in writing to my attorney, Mr. Sterling. If you call my personal phone asking for money, you will be blocked. If you show up at my office, security will escort you out. If you attempt to contact my husband, my friends, or my employees regarding my finances, it will be considered harassment." I looked at Jolene, who was still crying silently. "This also includes a clause regarding identity theft. If I find any further evidence that my name has been used on documents without my wet ink signature, I will press charges. I am giving you a grace period of 24 hours to destroy any other drafts you might have. After that, I go to the police." The room was silent. The air was thick with the death of their expectations. I had walked in here as a daughter they thought they could bully. I was leaving as a stranger they could not touch. Camden stood up, his face twisted in a rictus of hate. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You are evil," he spat. "You come here in your fancy car, waving your millions in our faces, and you leave us with nothing. You are selfish. Scarlett, you are the most selfish person I've ever met." I stood up. I smoothed the front of my blazer. I picked up my bag. I looked at my brother, a man who had been given everything and appreciated nothing, a man who stole my name because he was too lazy to build his own. "No, Camden," I said, my voice quiet but ringing with finality. "Selfish is not protecting your own hard work. Selfish is expecting me to set myself on fire to keep you warm." I looked at Victor and Marlene. They could not even meet my eyes. "Selfish," I said, delivering the final blow, "is remembering I exist only when you see a Porsche in the driveway." I turned around and walked out of the dining room. I did not look back. I could feel their eyes burning into my back, but for the first time in my life, the heat did not hurt. It felt like the sun coming out after a long, cold winter. I walked through the front door and into the fresh air. The gravel crunched under my heels. A sound of departure, a sound of freedom. 2 days after I walked out of my parents' dining room, the war they promised arrived at my doorstep, or rather, at the glass revolving doors of the Ashford Meridian Group Tower in downtown Seattle. I was in a strategy meeting with my transition team when the head of building security called my direct line. His voice was polite but strained. He told me there were 3 individuals in the lobby demanding to see me. They claimed to be my family. They were raising their voices. They were making a scene. I walked to the window and looked down 40 stories. I could not see them, of course, but I could imagine it perfectly. Victor would be using his manager voice, loud enough to embarrass the receptionist but not loud enough to get arrested. Marlene would be playing the weeping mother, dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief, and Camden would be pacing, looking like a man who had been cheated out of his inheritance. "Do you want us to bring them up, Ms. Rivera?" the security chief asked. "No," I said, my voice calm. "They do not have an appointment. If they continue to cause a disturbance, please escort them off the property. Use whatever standard protocol applies to trespassers." I hung up the phone. I did not go down. I did not engage. I simply opened my laptop and sent one email to Camden, copying Victor and Marlene. "All future communication will be handled through legal counsel. Do not come to my place of business again." I hit send. Then I went back to my meeting. I refused to let them turn my professional sanctuary into their personal theater. By the time I left the office that evening, they were gone. But the battlefield had shifted. Camden, realizing he could not bully me in person, took his grievance to the court of public opinion. He posted a long, rambling status on his social media, which he made public. He did not name me directly, but he tagged my company handle. It is sad when money changes people. He wrote, "You sacrifice everything for family. You support them when they are nothing, and the moment they make it big, they abandon you. Some people forget where they came from. Some people would rather give millions to strangers than help their own flesh and blood survive a crisis." It was a masterful piece of fiction. It painted him as the martyr and me as the heartless corporate sellout. Within an hour, his friends, the country club crowd, the people who only knew the version of the story my parents told, were commenting with sympathy. So true. They wrote, "Family should always come first." For a moment, I felt a spike of anxiety. Reputation is currency in my world. If I was branded as the icy, ungrateful daughter, it could bleed into my business relationships. But Camden had forgotten one thing. The internet is not a country club. It is a hive mind, and it is ruthless when it smells hypocrisy. The tide turned with a single comment from a user I did not recognize. "If you are so close to her," the stranger wrote, "why are there no photos of you at her wedding on her profile?" I scrolled back 2 years. I see her husband. I see her friends. I do not see you. Camden did not reply. Then came the kill shot. Kira, my maid of honor, did not write a long defense. She did not engage in a comment war. She simply posted a photo on her own timeline and tagged Camden. It was a high-resolution shot from the ceremony. It showed the front row. It showed the 3 white chairs with the reserved signs. And it showed them sitting completely empty while I walked down the aisle in the background. She added no caption. The image was the caption. The photo went viral within hours. It was shared on local community pages. It was retweeted by people who did not even know me but recognized the universal pain of parental neglect. The narrative Camden tried to build, the abandoned family, crumbled instantly. He was not the victim. He was the brother who couldn't be bothered to show up for his sister's biggest day, but showed up immediately when he smelled cash, desperate to regain control. Camden agreed to an interview with the River County Ledger, a local paper that usually covered high school sports and charity galas. He thought he could charm the reporter, a young woman named Sarah trying to make a name for herself. He thought he could spin the misunderstanding angle. He was wrong. I watched the video clip of the interview later. Sarah sat across from Camden in a coffee shop. Camden was wearing his best suit, smiling that charming smile he used on investors. "We just want to reconcile," Camden said to the camera. "We are a tight-knit family. This whole thing has been blown out of proportion." Sarah looked at her notes, then looked up at him. She did not smile back. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, her voice steady, "you claim you are a tight-knit family. Can you explain why you, your mother, and your father were absent from Ms. Rivera's wedding 2 years ago? Sources say you were in town that weekend." Camden froze. He blinked rapidly. The charm evaporated, replaced by the panic I had seen in the dining room. "Well, that is complicated," he stammered. "There were scheduling conflicts. It was a busy time." "You were too busy to attend your only sister's wedding," Sarah pressed. "But you were not too busy to ask her to guarantee a $400,000 loan last week." Camden ended the interview abruptly, standing up and knocking over his water glass. But the damage was done. The clip was shared thousands of times. He looked evasive. He looked greedy. He looked exactly like what he was. While Camden was imploding publicly, Marlene tried a different tactic. She started calling my professional network. She called Avery Knox's office. She called the partners at the law firm I used. She tried to leverage her role as a concerned mother to bypass my blockers. She underestimated the loyalty I had built. Avery told me later that she had called him crying, claiming she was worried about my mental state and suggesting I was being influenced by bad advisors. "I told her," Avery said. recounting the conversation over lunch. That the only thing wrong with your mental state was that you had tolerated them for this long. And then I told her that if she contacted my office again, I would file a restraining order on behalf of the firm. Every door she knocked on was slammed in her face. My world was hermetically sealed against them. Finally, Jolene tried. A package arrived at the Ashford Meridian Group mailroom on Friday. It was wrapped in expensive paper. Security scanned it, cleared it, and brought it to my desk. Inside was a framed photograph of me holding Camden's hand when we were children. I was 6, he was 4. We looked happy. Tucked into the frame was a note on heavy cardstock. "We miss you. Please come home. We can fix this. Love, Jolene." It was a precision-guided missile aimed at my nostalgia. It was designed to make me remember the few good moments and forget the decades of neglect. It was a manipulation wrapped in a memory. I did not cry. I did not soften. I took the photo out of the frame. I put it in the shredder. I placed the empty frame back in the box. I added a printed copy of the legal notice I had given Victor, the one outlining the strict no-contact boundaries. I sealed the box and marked it, "Return to sender." By the end of the week, the public sentiment had shifted so overwhelmingly that it created an unexpected side effect. The Frost Fellowship Endowment. The fund I had established with the $15 million began to trend. People were not just talking about the drama. They were talking about the solution. They saw a woman who took the weapon of financial abuse and turned it into a shield for others. Donations started pouring in from strangers. $10, $20. One woman donated $500 with a note that read, "For the girl who walked down the aisle alone. You are not alone anymore." My parents wanted to drag me into the mud. Instead, they had inadvertently built a pedestal, and the entire world was watching me stand on it. Taller than I had ever been. The letters arrived in heavy, cream-colored envelopes, the kind used for wedding invitations or formal apologies. They were not handwritten on legal pads this time. They were typed on high-quality stationery, signed with the flourishes of parents who believed their signature still commanded respect. I sat in my office at Sable North, the city skyline gray and rainy behind me, and read the first one from Marlene. "Dearest Scarlett." It began, "We have been reflecting on everything. We want you to know that we have always been so proud of your independence. We pushed you because we knew you could handle it. We were hard on you because we saw your potential." I lowered the paper. It was a masterclass in revisionist history. They were trying to reframe 2 decades of neglect as a strategic parenting decision. They were claiming authorship of my success. They wanted to believe that their indifference was actually the catalyst for my strength, rather than the obstacle I had to overcome. It was a desperate attempt to write themselves back into a story where they had written themselves out. Then came the text from Camden. It was less poetic. "You think you are untouchable," the message read, "but I know who you really are. I will tell everyone what kind of person leaves her family to drown. You are cold, Scarlett, and eventually, the world will see it." He was threatening me with the only weapon he had left, my character. But he failed to realize that character is defined by action, not by the accusations of a man who forged a signature to cover his bad investments. The real blow came 2 days later, and it did not come from me. It came from First Merchants Bank. My attorney, Mr. Sterling, called me on a Tuesday morning. His voice was professional, clipped, and deeply satisfied. "Scarlett," he said, "the bank's fraud department has flagged the loan application. They noticed the discrepancy between the date of the credit pull and the date of the guarantee. They are opening a formal internal review. They are asking questions about who exactly submitted the paperwork." The dominoes were falling. I did not have to push them. I just had to step out of the way. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Victor. I let it ring 3 times before answering. When I did not say hello. I simply listened. "Scarlett?" His voice was tight, breathless. It lacked the booming authority I was used to. It sounded small. "The bank called Camden. They are asking for an interview. They want to verify the origin of the documents. That sounds like standard procedure for a loan investigation, I said, leaning back in my chair. You have to stop this, Victor hissed. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you authorized it verbally. If they dig deeper, if they find out about the email Scarlett, this could ruin Camden's reputation. This could ruin my reputation. There it was, the truth, stripped of all the family rhetoric. He was not afraid of losing his relationship with me. That was already gone. He was afraid of the exposure. He was afraid that the country club set, the golf buddies, and the business partners would find out that the Rivera family was built on fraud and bad debt. I cannot stop a bank investigation, Victor, I said calmly, and I will not lie to federal regulators to cover up a crime I did not commit. You told me to be independent. This is what independence looks like. I am protecting my name. Come on, don't do this, he pleaded, his voice cracking. We are your parents. Then act like it, I said, and hung up. I went to see Dr. Lila Soren that afternoon. I sat on her couch, recounting the call, waiting for the guilt to hit me. I waited for the familiar wave of shame, the feeling that I was a bad daughter for not falling on the sword for them, but it did not come. I feel nothing, I told her. Is that wrong? Doctor, Lila smiled, a genuine, warm expression. No, Scarlett, that is not numbness. That is clarity. You are not taking revenge. Revenge is emotional. Revenge is about inflicting pain to balance a score. What you are doing is escaping control. You are establishing the laws of your own nation, and you are enforcing them. That is not malice. That is sovereignty. Sovereignty. The word tasted like fresh water. The next day, I attended the first board meeting for the Frost Fellowship Endowment. We sat around a large oak table, reviewing the first batch of applications. There were hundreds of them. I picked up a file near the top of the stack. The applicant was a 19-year-old girl named Tessa Quinn. Her essay was typed on a library computer. I could tell by the formatting marks. My parents told me that coding was for boys. She wrote, they told me that we could not afford the boot camp, even though my brother just got a new dirt bike. I learned Python by reading books at the public library on weekends. I just need a chance to show what I can build. I read the paragraph twice. I saw the girl sitting in the library, ignoring the noise, ignoring the doubt, building a future line of code by line of code. I saw myself. This one, I said, sliding the file to the program director. Tessa Quinn, full scholarship, and I want to personally mentor her. Are you sure? The director asked. You have a lot on your plate. I have never been more sure of anything, I replied. Giving that money away did not feel like a loss. It felt like an investment in the only version of the past I could change, the future of someone else. That Thursday was Thanksgiving, in the past. This holiday was a minefield. I would drive to Greenville, South Carolina, sit at the kids' table even when I was 30, and listen to Victor brag about Camden's imaginary successes while I passed the potatoes. This year, Gavin and I hosted Friendsgiving at our home. The table was long, covered in a linen cloth, and crowded with mismatched platters of food brought by our guests. Kira brought her famous stuffing. Avery brought 3 bottles of vintage wine. My entire executive team was there, along with neighbors and friends we had made over the years. There was no tension. There were no passive-aggressive comments about my weight or my job. There was just laughter. Loud, raucous, genuine laughter. I looked down the table at Gavin. He was carving the turkey, telling a joke that had the whole room in stitches. He caught my eye and winked. I raised my glass. To the family we build, I said. To the family we build, everyone shouted back. The warmth in that room was real. It was not performative. No one was there because they shared DNA. They were there because they wanted to be, and for the first time. I realized that I was not the one missing out. My parents were. They were sitting in their big, cold house in Greenville, South Carolina, protecting their lies, while I was surrounded by truth. The next morning, I made the final move. I met with Mr. Sterling in his office to sign the final batch of documents. These were not for the bank. They were for me. I was establishing a comprehensive asset protection trust. It was a legal fortress. It placed strict protocols on all my accounts. It required multi-factor authentication for any credit inquiries. It set up a legal barrier that made it impossible for anyone, parent, sibling, or spouse, to access my capital without a court order. I also signed a formal cease and desist regarding the use of my identity for any commercial purpose. "This is aggressive, Scarlett," Mr. Sterling warned, though he looked impressed. "This effectively treats your family like hostile entities. It closes every loophole. They will not be able to so much as open a store credit card in your name ever again." "Good," I said. I picked up the pen. It felt different than the day I signed for the Porsche. That day, I was buying a symbol. Today, I was signing a treaty. I wrote my name, Scarlett Rivera. The ink dried instantly, dark and permanent. "It is done." "Mr. Sterling said, closing the binder. I walked out of the office and into the crisp autumn air. I checked my phone. There were 3 missed calls from Marlene and 2 from Camden. They were realizing that the old tricks, the guilt trips, the silence, the sudden emergencies, were hitting a wall they could not climb. I did not call them back. I did not feel the urge to explain. I had closed the door to the Bank of Scarlet, and for the first time, I locked it from the inside. They could knock all they wanted. I was busy living. The coffee shop was neutral ground. It was a small, bustling place in downtown Seattle, far enough from my office that my staff would not see me, but public enough that my parents would not dare cause a scene. I arrived 10 minutes early. I ordered a black coffee and sat at a table near the window. Watching the pedestrians rush by in the rain, when Marlene and Victor arrived, they looked different. The arrogance that usually draped over them like a heavy coat was gone, replaced by a frantic, weary energy. Victor's suit looked a little loose at the shoulders. Marlene was not wearing her usual heavy jewelry. They looked like people who had spent the last 2 weeks answering awkward questions from neighbors and dodging calls from bank investigators. They sat down opposite me. For a long moment, no one spoke. The noise of the espresso machine hissed in the background, filling the silence that stretched between us. "We were wrong," Victor said. The words hung in the air, heavy and foreign. It was the first time in 35 years I had heard my father admit to an error. He looked at his hands, which were clasped tightly on the table. "We should have been there," he continued, his voice rough. "At the wedding, we made a mistake." Marlene let out a small sob, reaching for a napkin to dab at her eyes. "We just wanted everyone to be successful. Scarlett, we thought you were strong enough to handle things on your own. We never meant to hurt you." I watched them, feeling a strange sense of detachment. "Doctor, Lila had warned me about this. She called it the hovering phase, when the controller realizes they are losing their grip and tries to soften their approach to reestablish the bond." "I appreciate the apology," I said, keeping my voice even. "Thank you for saying that." I waited. I knew there was a but coming. There is always a conjunction in a transactional relationship. "But Scarlett," Marlene sniffed, leaning forward and lowering her voice, "we are in a terrible position now. The bank is aggressive. Camden is falling apart. Jolene is so stressed about the baby. If you could just help him this one last time, just to make the fraud investigation go away, we can pay you back over time." The apology evaporated instantly. It was not a confession. It was a preamble to a sales pitch. They did not come here to heal the relationship. They came here because I was the only person left with a checkbook large enough to fix their mess. I took a sip of my coffee. It was bitter, grounding. "No," I said. Victor's head snapped up. "What do you mean? No. We just apologized." "An apology is not a currency. Victor," I said, "you cannot trade 'I am sorry' for a federal fraud investigation. That is not how the law works." I reached into my bag. This time, I did not pull out a check. I pulled out a stapled document, prepared by Mr. Sterling that morning. I am not going to bail Camden out, I said, sliding the paper across the table. But I am willing to offer a path forward. These are my conditions for any future relationship with this family. Victor picked up the paper. His eyes scanned the bullet points. Number 1, I recited from memory. Family therapy, weekly sessions with a licensed professional of my choosing, paid for by me, but attendance is mandatory for both of you. Number 2, a complete cessation of all harassment. No more calling my employees. No more showing up at my office. No more social media posts. I pointed to the final paragraph. And number 3, I said, you will sign a sworn affidavit stating that I had no knowledge of and gave no consent for the loan application submitted to First Merchants Bank. You will clear my name legally today. Victor dropped the paper. This is ridiculous. You want us to sign a confession? That will implicate Camden. Camden implicated himself when he forged my signature, I said. I am just asking you to tell the truth. It is not necessary, Victor scoffed, the old defensive anger flaring in his eyes. We can handle this internally. We do not need therapy. We do not need lawyers. Then you do not need me, I said simply. I started to stand up. If you cannot meet these basic terms of respect and honesty, then we have nothing to discuss. I will continue with my life, and you can continue with yours. Wait, Marlene cried out, grabbing Victor's arm. Scarlett, please, is there nothing else? We are drowning here. I paused. I looked at my mother, a woman who had spent her life enabling the men around her until she had nothing left for herself. I felt a flicker of pity, but I did not let it dictate my actions. I have one other offer, I said. It is a humanitarian one. I placed a second brochure on the table. It was for a top-tier financial counseling and debt restructuring firm. I have prepaid for 12 months of service with this agency, I explained. They will help you and Victor restructure your personal debts. They will help you budget. They will help you save your retirement. I have paid the fees directly to them. No cash will come to you. No money will go to Camden. This is help for you to survive, not for him to play businessman. It was a test. If they truly needed help, they would take it. If they just wanted my money to fuel their dysfunction, they would refuse. Before they could answer, the bell above the door chimed. Camden rushed in. He was 20 minutes late, his tie crooked, his face flushed with the kind of frantic energy that comes from sleepless nights and desperation. He saw us at the table and stormed over, ignoring the stares of the other patrons. So, he demanded, looking from Victor to me, did she sign? Is the check ready? He did not even say hello. He did not look at our parents to see if they were okay. He just looked for the money. Victor did not answer. He just stared at the brochure on the table, the one that offered financial literacy, not a bailout. She is not signing, son, Victor said quietly. She offered counseling. Counseling? Camden laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. He turned on me, his eyes wild. You think you are better than us? You think because you got lucky with some software company you can sit there and judge us. You owe us, Scarlett. We raised you. I looked at my brother. I looked at the man who had been the golden child, the investment, the priority, and I saw him for what he was, a 37-year-old man who had never been allowed to grow up because he had never been allowed to fail. You are right, Camden, I said, my voice calm in the face of his storm. You raised me. You raised me to be resilient. You raised me to solve my own problems. And now, I am giving you the greatest gift I can give. I am letting you solve yours. I picked up my bag. I placed a $20 bill on the table to cover the coffee. If you want to be a family, I said to the three of them, start by taking responsibility. Sign the affidavit. Go to the therapy. Do the work. If not, then I will see you in court regarding the identity theft. You are selfish. Camden shouted as I turned away. I stopped at the door. I looked back at them one last time. They sat frozen in a tableau of dysfunction. Victor defeated, Marlene weeping, Camden raging. "No," I said. "I am finally free." I walked out into the rain, but I did not feel wet. I felt clean. 6 months later, the morning sun hit the sleek, agate gray curves of my Porsche 911 Turbo S as I pulled up to the curb. But today, the car was not a statement of rebellion. It was just a car. It was just a beautiful machine that took me to the places that mattered. I stepped out onto the sidewalk in front of the newly renovated brick building in downtown Seattle. The sign above the door was modest but elegant. The Frost Fellowship Center for Technology and Arts. A crowd had gathered. There were reporters, community leaders, and young women holding brochures, their faces bright with anticipation. I walked through the crowd, shaking hands, smiling. I felt a hand on my arm. It was Gavin. He looked at me with that steady, grounding love that had saved me so many times. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," I said. We walked to the podium. I looked out at the sea of faces. In the front row, sitting in the seat of honor, was Tessa Quinn. She was wearing a blazer I had helped her pick out. She looked nervous, but when she saw me, she squared her shoulders and smiled. She had fire in her. Then, I saw them. Standing at the very back of the crowd, outside the velvet ropes, were Marlene and Victor. They were dressed quietly. They looked older. They were not on the guest list. I had not invited them, but I had not banned them either. They were watching me. For the first time in my life, they were watching me not to critique, not to demand, but simply to witness. They saw the ribbon cutting. They saw the applause. They saw the reality of what I had built without them. I did not wave. I did not invite them in. They had made their choice decades ago, and now they were living in the world they had created. They were spectators. I turned back to the microphone. I looked at Tessa. I looked at the 20 other scholarship recipients behind her. "Welcome," I said, my voice ringing clear across the square. "This center is built on a simple promise. You do not have to wait for someone to give you permission to be great. You do not have to wait for a seat at the table. You can build your own table." I cut the ribbon. The crowd cheered. I saw Tessa stand up and walk toward the stage to receive the first grant. I looked past her, toward the horizon. The sky was a brilliant, endless blue. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air of a life that was finally, completely, my own. I smiled, turned my back on the ghosts of my past, and walked toward the future. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please comment your location below so we can connect and share our thoughts together. Please subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, like the video, and hit the like button to help this story reach even more people.